Hello, in this video I'm going to introduce some JavaScript basics, getting JavaScript connected to our HTML, talk about things like data types, possibly functions, kind of get the ball rolling for JavaScript. Okay, so to start we have a setup we've looked at many times now. We have a style sheet with a reset and a styling of an H1, which I can test to see if that's connected. So then we're going to create something new now. So I'm going to call this thing Datatypes.js. And we'll see now, you can kind of tell, like based on these little icons here, what the code is. To connect this to our HTML, we put in at the bottom of our body a script tag. And we say source equals datatype.js. Now to test to see if this works, we need something called a console. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my live site here and we'll head over to Chrome. Smaller. Do a little housekeeping here. Of that. I'll paste my live server URL here. Okay, so that's working. And then I'm going to inspect this. And what I'm looking for, let's get this looking a little better. Let's do that. Console. Here we go. Okay, so this will be really helpful in working with our JavaScript. So just as I made this color red to test my CSS, I'm going to use a little test in my JavaScript as well. And you don't really have to understand like what's happening. We're just going to do console.log. And then what do we want it to do? We want it to say, hello world. And we can see it's working. So console is basically, what do you want to have happen over here? Log is a command that says to like display something in the console. And then what do we want to display? We want to display this text. And now I can see that I have a setup, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the next idea I want to introduce is the idea of a variable. So what a variable does is it lets us name some data, and data is information, and then be able to manipulate or retrieve it later. Well, how do we do this? So there's two ways to do it. There's let and const. Let is something that you could change later, like the score of a game. Whereas const would be something that is not changeable, like your birthday. So let me show you real quick. So let, we'll say score equal 3. And then I can say score, somebody scored and now it equals 4. And then over here in my console, I can retrieve the current score. See, 4, 5, okay. Now, const, on the other hand, would be something like, actually, no, we'll just leave this here for a second. Const would be something like my birthday. And that is November 25th. Okay, so that's something that doesn't change. Your birthday's your birthday. Okay? you might see something like var my variable equals, I don't know, another number, 8, let's say. And that will still work. And you will also see var in older JavaScript, but in modern JavaScript at the time of recording this video, you want to use let and const. Okay, so even just looking at this here, you're going to notice some differences. Okay, so for example, when I was using numbers, I just typed out the number, whereas when I put in this date, there's some quotes around it. And that is because different kinds of information or different kinds of data is encoded different ways. So let's say things like numbers work like this. My number equals, 1. Retrieve it over here. Okay, so numbers are ways of storing numeric value. They can be positive or negative. They can be integers or floats. Integers, whole numbers. Floats are numbers with decimals. JavaScript doesn't really care. And we'll call this my number. Another kind of good convention when we're setting variables is to give the variable some kind of name, short name that makes sense to you when you use it later, right? Because I'm just storing a number. I'm talking about numbers. So integers, floats, integers being whole numbers, floats being decimal numbers. In other programming environments, you have to specify within the data type of number what kind of number it is. An integer, a positive integer, a negative integer. For example, in Bifrost and Maya, there's positive and negative integers, and those are called signed and unsigned int. But in JavaScript, you just number. And a number is a data type. So the next data type I want to talk about is strings. So this one we're going to say let my string. And strings are text, sort of. Maybe a better definition is strings are lists of characters. So a string could be like some text, like hello, and over there, right? It can have gaps in it. Hello world, right? It can have names. Peter, right? They can be super long and have a bunch of stuff. There can also be punctuation, like ands, ats, and all kinds of craziness. But strings can also have numbers. So, 34 in this instance is not a value, it's a string. It's the string of the keystroke 3 and 4. And this is something that can be kind of confusing. So 54 plus, it's just text, is not numeric. And where would we see that? Maybe a date is kind of a good example of that. Or maybe an address. I'm not sure. But anyway, you can see numeric values in strings, and the data becomes a string data type and not a numeric data type. So the next data type I want to introduce to you is Booleans. So Booleans, my Boolean can only have 2 values, either true or false. So think of Booleans as a kind of on-off switch or a test of true or false. And we can use them in something called conditions. So you can test if something is true or false, and then the Boolean will return that value. But that's the Booleans, true or false. So we have numbers, strings, Booleans. The next data type is actually a list of things. So you can kind of imagine that a string is actually a list of things, but this data type can be a list of values, a list of strings and values. So let me explain here. So we're going to say let my array equal. In each of these things, we'll notice like a little syntax, right? So the number, you just type out the number. The string, you put in quotes. The Boolean are special words that are either true or false. For the array, you use a square bracket. And so, like I said, an array can be a list of values. It can also be a list of different data types. So we can have 2 numeric items in our array, but then also a string. And we could also have a Boolean in here. So then, how do we retrieve these values? Up until this point, when we've been putting in our data types, there's one corresponding value for the name, whereas in the array, there's a list of items. So if I do this, it will give me the whole list. It'll return the whole list. If I want to get a specific slot in here, I use the square brackets, right? So another kind of new and unusual thing about programming and in general is that in programming, you start counting from 0. In this list, instead of this being 1, 2, 3, 4, this is slot 0, this is slot 1, this is slot 2, this is 3. So if I put in my array slot 0, it's going to give me the 0. If I go 0, 1, 2, it's going to give me the hello. Right? And 3 is the true. We can also create an array that's empty and fill it up later. So right now, it's looking for slot 3 and nothing's there. But if I get rid of it, it's just telling me that it's empty for now. So the next data type I'm going to talk about is objects. Objects are a little different than the other data types we've been looking at so far. And the best way to introduce them is just to think about what objects are in reality outside of code. And that can help us kind of frame how we introduce it in code. So let's use a car for example, a car in reality. So a car has properties, things you can name about it. So who the maker or manufacturer is, Mini, or also BMW. It's a model, is the Cooper. It weighs 850 kilograms, and this one is yellow. In addition to properties that describe the car, there's also methods, things that the car can do, right? It can start, it can drive, it can brake, it can stop, it can signal, and so forth. So if we go back to JavaScript for a sec, I can say const. This isn't going to change, right? My car equals, and so up until this point, right? Each of these data types have syntax that help identify what they are, right? So the numbers you just type in, the strings you put in quotes, Booleans are special words, arrays are in these square brackets. Objects also have their own syntax, and what that is curly brackets like this. And each property has a name-value pair, just like CSS. Okay, so car, I can say maker colon, just like CSS. And then within defining what the maker is, I can have other data types. So the maker is a string, which is mini. Then I can add more stuff with a comma. Model is a string. Cooper, right? But I could have other data types. I could say, year. Or, oops, sorry, I'm still in the quotes there. Comma. Oh, not equals, sorry. The year could be a number, 2020. So within an object, we can have other data types, and an object is defined by this curly bracket. So then how do we retrieve things from this object variable? So if I put car in here, it's going to give me everything about the car. But how about if I just wanted the model? To do that, I use dot model, and that will return Cooper. So objects are really foundational to JavaScript. JavaScript is called an object-oriented programming language, and then here are the objects, right? And so objects are containers to store functions and values, and objects can be composed of other things. And then we see this a lot, right? So object car dot model is the property from the car. And then eventually we're going to see things like, this is not going to work, but start with these little open and closed quotes, which is like a method that the car can do. So to bring our slide back up for a second, we can pull properties with the dots, and we can pull methods with the dots and then parentheses. So the last thing I want to add is that, we can add other data types, which means we can also add arrays. So we could say, for example, owners. So if this is a used car, we can use our square brackets, and it could be, I don't know, Peter, Ringo, and Betty, right? So then the question is, how do I retrieve that? So I can do car dot owner, which will give us all the owners. And then I could figure out, well, what about who was the first owner? Peter. So that's an introduction to get JavaScript connected, to look at things through the consoles, and introducing the idea of data types and variables.